You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 467. And in this one, I got on Jonny Say, who is a UK-based therapist and co-founder of the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy. Now, this is a part 2 to Jack's episode last week, which was titled Understanding and Practicing ACT Skills, the Client's Perspective. Now, this is the same title, but the therapist's perspective. So Jonny is Jack's therapist, and I originally approached Jack when he came up with this idea of doing this episode. Then I asked him, what would it be like if Jonny did sort of a response to your episode after listening to it? So this is what this episode is. So thank you so much to Jack for allowing Jonny to do that and for coming on last week again. I appreciate it. The first part of this episode is Jonny going over his thoughts on Jack's episode, because I gave him it ahead of time to listen for this episode. So Jonny shares his thoughts on what Jack said, and he adds some points. And then Jonny shares some blocks and resistances to OCD skills practice more generally. He also shares some interpersonal blocks that can occur and other ideas that can help. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you so much to Jack again for last week. I appreciate it. And thank you to Jonny for coming on, putting in the legwork, and prepping for this episode and doing a part 2 to Jack's episode. I appreciate it. And as always, thank you to you guys for listening. It means a lot. Without further ado, here is Jonny. Welcome back to the podcast, Jonny.
Thanks, Stu. Great to be here as always.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. I won't ask you for an update because you were on about a month ago at this point. But obviously, so last week, for those that haven't heard it yet, I did a part 1 with Jack. Jack has shared his story on the podcast before, and he came on last week to specifically talk about, being committed to the work, doing the home practice or homework, whatever we want to call it, his approach to doing the work and doing the homework, his mindset around that. Really interesting episode. If you listen to it, thank you. If you haven't, hopefully this episode should still be pretty good, but feel free to go back and listen to part 1. So it's Jack's perspective. He is obviously the client of Jonny, and now it's Jonny, the therapist's perspective on what Jack said in the previous episode. It's a bit confusing there, but so yeah, Jonny, you listened to the episode. What did you think of it?
Yeah, and I've chatted a bit with Jack, so he's aware of anything that I say here. I've checked; he's happy with me to comment. And yeah, I think, as you said, you're very proud of how he's used the skills and how he's worked hard at recovery, and 100% echo that. I think we met Jack on the OCD camp, and he was suffering intensely at that point. As soon as you met him, you could feel the pain he was in, because he'd had OCD all these years without any support or any knowledge of it. And then he was going through this horrendous sort of life process situation, which if you've heard his story, you've heard him talk more about. And so he was in immense pain, but he was immediately very compassionate and kind and open to everyone in the group. And I think immediately everyone could feel, this sort of values and heart resonating from him. And, so yeah, I think he's had an impact on a lot of people already. And I think him telling his story and talking about what has worked for him will have a huge impact. So I'm super proud of that for him. And Yeah, I think you can tell that he's a driven individual. I think he has certain personality traits that do make it a bit easier to just launch into practice, as you guys explored. A strong work ethic in multiple domains, physical training, but also work. And as a father, I mean, he's incredibly committed as a father, very inspiring to hear him, talk about how front and center, his kids' emotional well-being and happiness is. And, that will help him. But I think you hinted at it, that he has had times when he wasn't motivated. So it's not like he's always been like that. He said himself there were periods where he was very much drugs and alcohol and in a lot of pain and suffering, and by no means the motivation that he had. And then he had that sort of switch, I think he described, with having kids and other things, that he got very motivated and committed to work and things. So I think that was one thread, is like, yes, he has these natural resources and is very determined and hardworking. At the same time, suffering drove him to do that. And, it doesn't mean just because you don't have those qualities that you can't do this work. I mean, one thing with Jack, I think you'll remember, as I did, at Go Ape, like Jack was running around up on top of the tree bridges. Go Ape's this sort of tree rope bridge climbing sort of experience we have in the UK. And, Jack is fearless up there. He's running around, certainly lots of things. He's got very low, typical fear. And, that's another thing that, like, people can have OCD where they're very activated in some areas, but they actually are big risk takers in other areas. And it's always, for me, as someone who's not like that, my anxiety was across the board on everything. And, when we first did Go Ape, I was tackling, I'd had immense vertigo and fear of heights, and I wasn't quite sure how I'd be up there. I used my skills, I enjoyed it, and I was proud of how I did it. But, I'm not that personality at all that has that kind of, I'll go and do scary, dangerous things left, right, and center. And yet you can still be determined. You can still work hard. You can still commit and do scary things in recovery work, even if you're not, that kind of personality style. And, I can be committed and dedicated to things, but I've also avoided so much in my life. So I guess I just wanted to, reiterate that, yeah, Jack is very determined, very hardworking, but that isn't the only way you work hard at recovery. Yeah, that was one observation for me. He got the rationale right away. Something I sometimes struggle with people is, like, no one wants to be told to some degree they're going to have to accept their intrusive thoughts and move forward in their life and face difficult feelings, and that's going to be part of recovery. We all want some sort of Valium or some sort of thing that's going to bring this all down. Whereas I think because he'd suffered so much for so many years, he was ready to accept it and to start working on skills and start, he dropped all his physical compulsions almost overnight, which, as you know, doesn't happen that often, right? Not many people go, right, I'm going to drop all of these, magical number rituals, thresholds, things like that. Not many people do that. So he was really ready to go for it with recovery. And he made that commitment to himself of 10 minutes a day, which, he really stuck to in terms of skills and ERP. He's done more than that. A lot of days he would have been doing it all day long. But, again, it's not too big a commitment, is it? 10 minutes is doing for people.
Yeah, well, that's what really stood out for me. When he said that, I knew he was like ad hoc applying the skills all day, which is obviously what you and I encourage. Like, whenever it comes up, we try, and if we remember, we practice the skills. But that kind of set 10 minutes a day actual practice was actually what surprised me, because I don't know why. I just thought he would say an hour, 2 hours, which obviously would be a ridiculous amount of practice time. But 10 minutes a day just shows you how powerful that is. And then when you're applying the skills ad hoc, which he did. So, because I think it's like ad hoc is where most of the change is going to come, like as and when you need to use the skills, use the skills. But I think that 10 minutes a day is just priming you, is getting you ready and reminding you of the skill. So when it's game time, you're ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Much like drilling a musical instrument, you want to spend some time on your own and practice whatever chords, notes. You can tell I know very little about music already. You want to drill that intensely, but then it's playing with other people and improvising and practicing with others where you're going to learn stuff as well. So yeah, completely. I think he did more than that at times. I think that's his minimum commitment.
Okay.
I remember there were periods of time where he was also doing 20 minutes of, mindfulness practice or compassion practice at night on top of that, minimum 10 minutes. So he certainly did more than that at times. And he certainly had days and many days where he was doing it all day long. And some of the early ERP protocols are like 1 hour, 2 hour of ERP. There's a lot of intensity to that. When I was working on recovery, I was doing, my minimum was 30 minutes a day of targeted practice, but actually I was doing much more than that. On many, lots of days I was doing 1 or 2 hours, probably because I didn't have anything else in my life at that time and I could do that. And, OCD had claimed everything from me. So I was just, committing to it 100%, but I couldn't do that now if I, had to with all my prior, commitments and priorities and things now. So he was fitting that around having a family and everything else. But yeah, I think 10 minutes is doable, but we'll see that even that is tough. I think, we've worked together. He said 18 months. Jack's been ready to go it alone much sooner than that, but he's just been going through so much intensity in his life with these external stresses that we've kept it going. And I think we've wanted to work further, but to be honest, he could have taken this and run with this much sooner. And, he's committed enough, practicing enough on his own. And that's actually how my recovery work. I did 3 ERP sessions to kickstart ERP again. And then I was combining ACT and ERP and did all that work on my own over a period of sort of 3 to 6 months of great intensity and then continued it afterwards. So like, I do always want to get people to a place where they can do that on their own. But, sometimes life is throwing you so much pain and suffering over and over that, we need a bit more support than that.
And just to jump in there, I think, Jack really got the principles, especially of ACT and obviously ERP, but ACT really, really feels quickly, and he really understood it and wrestled with it and got it. And you can see that, when he did the talk at Game Changers recently in London, he was describing dropping anchor and maybe dipping in and out of the stream and ACT, and he did it so eloquently and clearly. Which is ideally we'd want everyone to get to, because when they can talk like that, they get it and they know how to apply it. So I think maybe I'm just saying this of like anyone listening, of whether it's ERP, ACT, whatever else, ICBT. If your therapist is sharing something, you don't quite get it, don't just say you get it, say you don't get it. And I love it when my young clients challenge me and say that doesn't make any sense, or no, I don't get it. And then and then I have to think of new ways of describing it. And I'd rather they do that, and then eventually I know they've got it, rather than they tell me they've got it, months go by, they're like, oh, what's this? And you're like, oh man, come on, I thought we knew that. And that's on me. I should have checked more as the therapist. It's my failing. But just to highlight, you don't always know, be honest.
Do you? Yeah. Sometimes people are very smart people, and you make the assumption as a therapist that they are getting it and understand it, and that's where I think the interactive practice is so helpful. If you're doing your practice and skills together and you're asking them about what's going on inside and how they're responding to it, and you're doing that in ERP, you can catch the markers that someone actually is using it to try and calm down, or they're trying to distract themselves, or they are using it compulsively, or they just don't know what to do, or they're so confused they can't even do it. I think you get that through doing that interactive practice and learning the look in someone's eyes, the way they feed back on what's going on inside. and then inviting those questions and then sort of trying to dig into it. But yeah, I'm sure I've missed it with people for sure. And actually, I know I have, because later it's become apparent that, I had assumed they got something and they didn't. And you're right, Jack could really articulate it. He could teach it. That's always a good one, isn't it? If they could teach it to a family member and explain why they're doing it, the rationale for it, that's a good sign. And like Jack gave his adapted version of ACT and ERP, but that's just with him the way we've been working. Actually it might look very different with another person. And yeah, Dropping Anchor has this sort of structure, for example, but that's only the beginning point. It's more skills and principles that are leading us to being able to just let go of our compulsions and accept thoughts, intrusive thoughts, feelings, and engage in life. But he really articulated that scaffolding. So some of those pieces that we've done, Jack was someone that he isn't triggered by watching videos or, doing other tasks you might do with someone else. We could watch any TV show. He's not going to be triggered by it. His triggers are very specific in his life, and the way we could get to them was more imaginal exposure. But someone else might be doing lots of other tasks and other things. So, I think highlighting that point of customizing it to the client and working together to collaborate to find what's the best way to trigger them at the right intensity where they can still access their skills, adapt the skills if you need to, that stood out for me with Jack a lot. Yeah. And then not everything came easy. I think he'd be the first to say self-compassion, as someone who's had years and years of shame and immense self-criticism, he'll get really into self-compassion for a period of time, and then it will slip away a little bit and he has to reconnect and recommit to it. And that was the same with me. I had that a lot, not in a harsh inner critic for me so much, but I would just forget to do it. I would just start to forget to be, self-compassionate, and I'd have to reinstate that and start to practice it again. So, some things will come easier than others. I loved what he said when he said, OCD people are brave, but you just need to be that little bit braver. I thought that was such a good point, really well articulated, that, yeah, we're brave to cope with this stuff on a daily basis. Half your family that you, if you're unlucky, are judging you and being harsh about it. If they lived a day in what you're going through, you'd hear about it. They would not put up with that, So we are brave, and we do have a lot of resilience to keep going, but be that little bit braver and challenge it, call its bluff, go for it like Jack did. And then you'll start to get more of your life back, and then that will reinforce itself. So I loved that one. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think he had a real message of hope. Like, he talked about. I think he was talking about the group calls he does with some of his campers, and saying how he got it fairly quickly, or he put in the work fairly quickly, and he saw change fairly quickly. But some of the people in his group weren't seeing that. They weren't getting the change. But now, whatever it is, 2 years on, he's seeing actually they're starting to see that change and progress in their own lives. And he makes the point of everyone has their own timeline.
Completely.
And I think for me, Jack's episode is really about whatever your timeline is, just make sure we're doing our best to do the work. And I know you're going to talk about blocks. Because if our timeline is longer, then if we're doing the work, it will be the shortest it possibly can be.
Yeah.
In theory,
exactly.
There's other things that get in the way too, but
but yeah, for sure. And if we can find, the right level of pressure to push on it, like physical exercise, some people can, start training and they can really go for it. They can lift heavier and heavier every week. The gains are massive, or they can run faster and faster, push themselves harder. Other people can't do that. They have to be much more careful of injury. Not quite the right metaphor talking about injury, but you know what I mean? They have to pace it slower, and they're still progressing, but they're building up over a slower time period. And that can relate to a trauma history. It can relate to your attachment, what you've learned about inner security or not. Your life stresses, like how ruminative you are, versus action orientated. Like all kinds of things could feed into that. But you're right. If you're making those small steps, small changes week on week, that's the key thing to do. And I think I mean, when we were in America, I think on one of the panels we saw one of the real experts, I can't remember who it was now, but someone who'd been there from the very beginning of ERP, they literally said, sometimes you just need longer. And they were like, sometimes it takes 2 years, sometimes it takes 3 years, like, yes, there are these outcome data that show, results in a short space of time, but the criteria of who gets included in those studies, who anyone with comorbidity, unless it's studying comorbidity, as I understand, they get discluded, so like you're often not seeing the more complex cases where OCD's been around a long, long time and, it's really bedded in that sort of outcome research. So, 16 sessions is not going to be enough. I always remember someone told me that Aaron Beck said 50 sessions was the minimum for CBT. That was his minimum, at least at one point it was. And so, really, like, it can just take a lot longer, and that's tough when you're in it and you're feeling hopeless and you want to be out of the pain. But if you are working on skills and you can feel them improving and you're working on behavior change gradually and you see it improving, it's easier to keep going over that long time. And obviously we've got values, we've got goals, we've got compassion and other motivators to help persist with that.
And speaking of that, I can't remember if Jack said it in the episode or someone else did. I think it was Jack, about you kind of saying you just need those 10 like reference points.
Yes, yeah. We talked about it on the Insight.
That's where.
I think that's a principle I see, that like people are really struggling with low insight. When you really believe in the OCD, you need 10 experiences of it being really activated and really intense, and the urges to do compulsions are so strong, but you hold the line, you keep doing your skills continuously, you stick to values, you get through it. You get 10 of those under your belt, then you start to not believe your brain here, and you start to go, okay, I can make a choice here, not based off the anxious brain. It's that kind of idea. But I think you related it to urge surfing and, getting through 10 experiences of like real strong urges to do compulsion. Yeah, that'd be the same, like, same sort of idea. I think getting those 10 under your belt, and then let's see, like, if you really have done 10 and you're really proud of how you've handled it, then let's see like how you're feeling about recovery after that. And that's what I needed to do. I had to get 10 times of like believing I was going to die in the next minute, or I was going insane, or everything was meaningless, or, I was never going to not think about my breathing, or whatever it was. I had to get through 10 of those really intense experiences. And then, then it became easier to do that. So yeah, he's done that. He's definitely ridden through 10 intense, and went for it very quickly. And if we can get people to that place, it's strong. But there are a lot of barriers, and Jack is by no means, I sometimes when I'm talking to clients, I sometimes say maybe 10%, 20% of people really hit the ground running and just practice relentlessly. Like most people don't. There's another category of people that will do it when suffering is high and they want to get out of it, and then it falls away as they get a bit better, and you're sort of in and out of that. Or there's another group of people that are completely resistant and really don't want to practice, or are finding it very hard to practice. So, my clients, it's not, Jack and a lot of my clients who've done really well are like that, I would say, that have really just hit the ground running and, have made a commitment right away and practice every day. But, that is not everyone by any means. No. And yeah, I don't know if that's the same. I guess we've talked about the difficulties with teens. Maybe the younger kids will do that. They'll hit the ground running, but the teens maybe not. Would that be your experience?
Yes, that's definitely my clinical experience. Young kids typically, on average, do hit the ground running. Not always. Again, there's a few caveats and a few comorbidities that make it a bit sticky sometimes. But yeah, teens, and then later teens, they start to hit the ground running again. That's 16, 17, 18 onwards.
Want to get their life back, want to get out there, do things. Yeah. I mean, I think that, like I taught mindfulness for a long time before I trained as a therapist. It was the same there. It's a smaller subgroup of people that really practice something every day. Most people don't. They come and go, they fall into it, they fall out of it. It's like physical exercise. I think it's the studies, it's 30% of people stick to like a New Year's commitment around exercise, and 70% of people drop off by January. And like it is hard to do behavior change. It's difficult. I've got a nice list of some of the things I saw. I'd be interested if you relate to these or would add anything to them. I think one thing is humans don't like expending energy. We naturally conserve energy, and learning is hard. I saw some research saying that prefrontal cortex takes about 30% of our calories. So, we are using a lot of energy. I think that was Robert Sapolsky said that. Anyway, whatever it is, it takes a lot of energy to learn. So we conserve energy, and we don't want to do that. So that can be as simple as that. If you take, they do these anthropological studies with indigenous tribes, and they tell them about our lifestyle, they tell them about exercise, and they're like, what? Why on earth would you exercise when you don't need to? Like, you should be conserving your energy for when you need to hunt and things. So we think of people as lazy, but actually we're all trying to conserve energy. And no, I don't think anyone's lazy. There's just either this factor or other things are going on. It's boring, at least at the beginning. It's hard to sit and practice skills. ERP might be a bit different because it might be just activating or challenging, or you might be doing interesting stuff. Yeah. But actually just skills practice is boring for most people.
Oh, yeah, definitely for teens.
Yeah. And adults, like a lot of adults, they don't want to sit there and practice skills. They want to go and, see things or achieve things or do things.
Sorry, mate, to cut you off. I can, earlier before this, I was watching something on Netflix. I mean, I originally had planned a bit of work to do. We are recording this in the evening for context, for those listening. I was like, okay, I needed to edit a podcast, actually, funny enough. And I was like, I just really can't be bothered tonight. I'm just at a long day. I was like, I just watched Netflix. And then I was like, I also had a stressful day. So I was like, I really feel in my heart of hearts, I should probably just meditate for 10 minutes because I'm really frustrated in my head. And I was like, I just can't be asked. I just want to watch Netflix.
There you go. And the value of this, exactly. And you know how helpful it is. Like, imagine if you're just coming to this and you don't even believe it's helpful yet or understand that. Yeah. I think we get a dopamine release by imagining making a behavior change, and this trips people up. So if I think about, in the new year, I'm going to start exercising, get this image of myself, strongest, fittest version of myself ever, cha-ching, cha-ching, I'm feeling good, dopamine, and it's like my brain's done it. So people will do this. They'll like imagine training. They'll do sessions with the therapist and go, it's going to be great when I'm good at these skills. And, when I master recovery, and then we don't actually do the hard work because of that. I think culture feeds into it. There's this sort of busy hustle. You should be doing more, you should be working harder. And then people would deprioritize skills and things like that. Because of that, it's like, it never feels the right time. I'm at home and I feel like I should be looking after my family or sorting my house. I'm at work. I certainly can't do it there. People put it off. And then end of the day comes and it's like, we'll do it tomorrow. I think a big one is we just don't want to sit with the fear and the distress. And I think of this like poking the hornet's nest, like when you're feeling a little bit better, or you may still be in OCD, but it's not at its most intensity. You don't want to poke the hornet's nest. So that puts people off a lot. They're like,
definitely.
I won't train, I won't practice, oh gosh, I don't want to face this.
I hear that a lot sometimes with my clients where they're like, oh, did you do the exposure homework or the ACT skills or whatever it is? And they're like, no, because I was having a really good week and I didn't want to ruin it.
Yeah. 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 And you're like,
Yeah.
no, now's the time. Now's the
Yeah.
time to poke
Yeah.
that hornet's nest and
It's like,
get
I
really
want you
good
to
at
ruin
doing
your
that.
week. Like, that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
attitude. I
Yeah.
want you to
Yeah.
ruin it
Yeah.
because that will be you leaning into it and it will get better from there.
Yeah, and that's how you'll be most resilient in recovery. I mean, you and I, both people with OCD, working with lots of clients with OCD all day long, you're hearing themes that you used to struggle with, intrusive thoughts that used to be difficult. Imagine if we said, oh, I don't want to hear any of that. Like, you're going to be vulnerable to relapse and for things coming up, or I don't want to work with a client with that in case, it triggers me. I think the ultimate is just being willing to face it on your best day.
Yeah.
You're having a brilliant time, your wedding day or whatever it is. I bring it on. I want the intrusive thoughts even then, and because I can handle them. But that's hard to get to, and you can't get there right away. And you often need a lot of scaffolding and time to get there.
Yeah.
And related to that, people often feel the compulsions still feel like they're working to some degree. They're sort of feel like they're problem solving or preparing or controlling, or it feels dangerous or irresponsible to let go of, or I'm actually hooked in the dopamine of like I'm solving this problem, and so it's hard to let it go. So if I go and practice skills or ERP, I've got to put this stuff down, and it's hard to do that. So we got to realize it isn't helping and it is keeping this problem going. I think I said on the insight one, people can have a louder nervous system, and I don't think this is recognized enough in our field, that some people's level of anxiety and distress, and especially with trauma, dissociation, neurodivergence, other things like, and just the nature of some of us, we just have louder nervous systems and we believe our anxiety more, and it's just more intense to sit with it. And so that can be a barrier, so we need to adapt the practice, scaffold it, make it more gradual, find ways to adapt it there to get to that point where we can just sit with it. Keeping the powder dry. So it's quite nice to think I've got this thing that could work, like I don't want to try it in case it doesn't work. It's nice to have it there as like, oh, it could work, whereas if I try it and it fails, gosh, that's going to be devastating. So people will sort of sit in that like 1 foot in, 1 foot out because of that. Benefits aren't as obvious, at the gym, we use that metaphor a lot. You did with Jack. To some degree, those benefits can be quite fast. Like you can see fitness change in a couple of weeks. Sometimes, you can
definitely
start to lift heavy weight. Yeah, cardiovascular, you can, sometimes and especially if you were fit before, you regain it even quicker, and even strength training, you can add on a rep, or, so every couple of weeks you can see that there's some kind of progress being made. Whereas actually with this stuff, it's often not that obvious and not that linear. And sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. Actually, a lot of the time it gets worse before it gets better. You get aware of quite how much is going on there. And so it's tough, you have to sort of face all of that, and it's not as obvious. Now, that's where if you zoom out and you judge the progress over months rather than days and weeks, then you get a fairer picture. But even then, I like Kimberly Quinlan's graph in her book of like the expected recovery journey, which is like a linear straight line, and the actual one that's this big wiggly line that goes all over the place. I mean, that's what it's like, right, for most of us. So that's hard to sustain and keep going through. And then the last one on these sort of straightforward ones, and then I've got some interpersonal barriers. The last one is like OCD just holds you hostage and tricks you. It's like, what if you practice and you find out that your worst fear is true? You find out you are a pedophile or a murderer, or, what if you practice and then you take your eye off the ball and someone gets hurt or someone gets, ill or whatever. So OCD does these tricks of like, you better not practice because it's going to get worse. Or I've had people like, it's like OCD is almost like this entity saying, if you challenge me, you're going to get worse. I'm going to get worse.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you more intrusive thoughts, or I'm going to make you depressed, or, you're going to get suicidal. So it will do these things where it kind of it's very frightened of you making changes, basically. And it's like, don't make changes. Like, it'll try any kind of trick it can to stop you. And that's where we've got to go, no, I'm going to keep making changes. I don't need to listen to this voice. But it's hard. It feels so real for people.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, the interpersonal ones are tricky, and I'm sure you'll relate to these. So I've got a few of these. And I think this is where, like, you and I both like relational psychotherapies, FAP, and, good old person-centered relational stuff, some of the psychodynamic, but not the old school psychodynamic, the kind of relational side of that sort of stuff, attachment theory type things like that are very helpful, because people come and they bring all that attachment history and wounding and, ongoing interpersonal traumas and other difficulties. Some people with OCD can carry all of that, and then that plays out in the therapy relationship and becomes a barrier to making changes. And, some of the things I see are self-sabotage. Like, if I think I'm not worthy, I don't deserve a better life. So I'm going to kind of not actually do the things that help me, because I don't think of myself, as being worthy of that change. Shame related to that. I can have shame that isn't so creating that sort of learned helplessness response. It's more creating defensiveness. So I've been told I'm not good enough all my life. Now someone's telling me make some changes. That's someone else telling me I'm not good enough. So I push back against that and get defensive and like I'm not going to, I've sometimes worked with clients, they're not going to practice because I'm telling them to. So, it's that dance of how do we identify what's going on there and try and, make a change, which I've got ideas on as well. Rebellion, they don't trust the therapist because they don't trust other people. They haven't had that sense of secure attachment and trust, and their counter-transference, not in, in a very simplistic way. They are bringing, you are becoming like their parents that are telling them, stop doing these compulsions. These are ridiculous. You're wasting your time. They might have been very invalidating. And even if you're saying it compassionately, they hear the same message and they go into the argument with who you represent for them and things at that point. I'm sure you've seen all of this, right, Stu? You see all these things. Related to that, there's the admitting I'm wrong. I have to, like, if I'm going to make changes, I have to go, I've been wasting all this time. It hasn't been working. That can release grief, or that can be admitting to other people. Other people have been telling me I'm wrong, and I'm digging in my heels going, no, these are working and helping. And so there's interpersonal stuff there. And then the final one, and I think this is very unconscious, and you have to be very compassionate and not blame people. Like, sometimes in therapy, this becomes quite a punishing thing of like, oh, it's secondary gains. This person's treatment resistant because of their secondary gains. And I think it's way more subtle and unconscious, and people aren't doing this, on purpose. But sometimes there are these things, if I stay focused on my OCD behavior, then I don't have to go out in the world and take risks and, maybe hit failure and do, scary other difficult things. I can stay in this familiar suffering. It's not nice, but it's still familiar, and I can predict it and understand it. And it would be scary to put that all down and go out into the world and do some difficult things. Sometimes I am getting support from others or care, where people don't give care in any other way because the suffering's so bad. I then get care and, other things like that. I think there can be these things in place. They're very hard to raise because no one, no one wants to be told that there could be these secondary gains around this awful illness and disorder. But yeah, do you see much of those sort of interpersonal barriers to practice and kids resisting? I guess you see it with the teen parent dynamics and things like that. Sometimes you talked about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I will see it with teen more so than kid, but teen parent relationships, sometimes that can definitely interfere with treatment. And so they're not so much, counter transference with me. I'm sure it's there, but it's more, they'll be very open and real with me about why they're not doing it. But then the dynamic is between them and the parent as why it's not quite working. Yeah. So I'm witness to it, but it's not. Whereas maybe if I saw them as an adult, I would become the parent. And again, not to criticize the parents, for whatever reason, there's just a rupture and it happens, right? So yeah, I definitely see that. I think interpersonal stuff generally in therapy, it's obviously very common in all these other therapies like person-centered, even relational or psychodynamic, depth work. I think that's very much what those therapies are not entirely about, but it is a core component of it. And I think sometimes, this is my view of, say, CBT and the umbrella of a CBT, historically at least, it maybe didn't consider the relationship as much, it didn't consider the relationship as much, but more so the dynamics that are happening within the room. So it's two people, very different. We all bring our own stuff, baggage, ways of being, attachment styles. And I think maybe that was never thought about. It was like, hey, here's the intervention. We're going to see it through. We're going to do this. Now this, rather than, okay, this is not working. Well, what's going on in the relationship? Or, which is where sort of Nate and people have started thinking about FAP with OCD, functional analytic psychotherapy. So I guess what I'm trying to say, I think it's just a really important component that has been missed for a bit.
Yeah. And equally, you see it rolled into more modern CBT protocols, like even some of the textbooks that we used to have at the NHS, they have like whole chapters on the relationship and, these sorts of things. And even some CBT people roll a lot of those ideas in and things. So, they might call it process work or so. Yeah, I mean, it's just something to attend to. And I think sometimes people's solution to this is like, well, if you're not going to play game, then I can't work with you. That's you're blocking the therapy and you have to go somewhere else. I hear that all the time versus actually what is making this hard here. And, what are there relational, historical things playing out here that are making it hard for you to trust and commit to this process and go for it? Or do we need to adapt this therapy so that it's not you in at the intense level right away and just assume that always works well and always helps everyone, when actually there are people it doesn't. It triggers more trauma symptoms, more depression, more risk behavior, more, dissociation, other things. So, it's that sort of really listening to our clients and really understanding and looking together at the function. Like if there are those processes playing out, can we, I like Russ Harris has this notice, name, function, notice, name, normalize, function, workability. So you notice and name a pattern of behavior and normalize that it's a human, thing that we will do. And then what's the function here? If I'm thinking of clients sometimes where I've really said, like, I'm a skills-based therapist. We want to move to doing ERP and we want to be practicing a good chunk of skills in ERP every session. And yet they want to go into, everything that went wrong during the week. And like, there's no space to even talk, actually I've had clients where 50 minutes, they could easily cover that with just telling you, all those difficulties, which are true difficulties, but it's not going to help them if we just do that. And so getting in there and noticing and naming what's happening and trying to get agreement on the function of that. Like, why are they doing that? Is it genuine? Is it that we need to switch focus and work on these relational issues or whatever? Or is it that this is the avoidance because it's easier to ruminate about this stuff than it is to face the scary things? So trying to get that kind of agreement together, and it's hard. And like, I've worked with clients with, what gets called personality disorders, but, I often see more as sort of interpersonal trauma and complex trauma and things like that. And, not that there can't be any biological component. I think there is to some of that, but, I haven't worked with someone where there isn't an invalidating environment and difficulty there as well. And, it can be very confrontational, and people telling me exactly what they think about me immediately, and some interesting challenging stuff that challenges your own skills to because I'm not a conflict oriented person. I'm naturally conflict avoidant, so to work with that and stay in the room, but then try to get them on board with a lot of empathy and validation, and then I think this is what's happening. I think this won't work because of this rationale. What do you think? Yes, we can focus on these other areas of your life and work therapeutically on them, but we have to agree which one and stick on it, and not just jump around, problem hop, hundreds of things, and avoid working and changing anything. And that's hard and, very, very difficult to do. And I certainly haven't been able to do it with everyone, for sure. Some people, it's just been too difficult to get them out of that agenda because they've got so much pain and suffering in their history, and they're not ready to put that down and work on skills and ERP. But I would never tell someone, I'm not going to work with you. I would always keep coming back to what we need to do and why I think it won't work without that. And if you want to stay, we've got to do that. And, but it's complex in this area.
I agree. I think sometimes therapists, if they do that kind of, right, if you're not going to do the work, see you later, can be very invalidating. And I think sometimes therapists do that because they're like, okay, that's what they believe. And they're doing it out of compassion of, look, I'm here, come back when you're ready. And also they're aware they've got a big, long wait list probably, and they want to see the next person. So it can either be done invalidating or with compassion. So I don't want to say if neither are you, that if a therapist does that, they're wrong, because that's just their style of working. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's done with compassion. But for me, kind of like what you're saying, I typically would never kick a client out if the work's not being done. Or we'll keep exploring, we'll keep finding ways, we'll keep working on it, trying to get them to do more of the work, and or maybe we'll work on other stuff in the meantime, and I am honest with them and say, okay, look, I do believe though that we need to be putting in the work between sessions. If that's not happening, I'm happy to keep working with you, we'll keep trying, but I can't guarantee anything's going to shift.
Yes,
and so I'm honest, and then it's
your time and your money.
And money. Exactly.
Me too. Which is a very different message to. I mean, I have had clients where they've been told you're treatment resistant, you're not doing what you need to do. You're avoidant of emotion here. You got to. It's a very different message. Not that we can't get it wrong too, but yeah, I mean, so I think that's the complex, difficult stuff. I mean, most people, it's more for me, giving the real strong rationale for the skills, linking them to therapy goals, making sure people know why they're doing them and what will be helpful, and practicing it together in session and starting to build that capacity in session so that it then, like a personal trainer, becomes easier to do it on your own outside of session. Although, that's not a perfect analogy because some people just need a personal trainer. But then there's recovery groups and support groups and peer support and other things for that. Some people, we've got to stabilize it first. The issue can be pushing them too fast to ERP, or they haven't got their head above water with these intense symptoms and compulsions, and we need to get those overwhelm crisis coping skills stronger, behavioral activation in place, some degree of distance from the OCD before we start moving in, and then it's easier if you do that. Then they will practice. It's not so frightening and overwhelming and scary because you've sort of gradually built up to it and you've got the kind of flames under control a little bit. And I do adapt the practice as some people with severe dissociation and very intense trauma and other things. We're not just launching into not that anyone is really launching into ERP, but we might be really building up those coping skills I wouldn't even call them coping skills, those acceptance skills and attentional skills and, all of that stuff very gradually before we go for the more challenging stuff. And, some people haven't been able to do that. And we've actually done more, actually focus on response prevention and life being, the focus. So life is the exposure. Let's build the best life we can here. And let's work on getting the skills there to get the compulsions down. And that's like our approach to the ERP, because it's just too confronting for them to sit and do it, and with trauma or dissociation or other symptoms. So like there's always a way of adapting it, I think. And some people might go, oh, well, that's not the protocol, or is that avoidance? But no, like as Rich Gallagher's work with the Discuss stuff shows, like you sometimes have to adapt this for people. There is a big dropout rate, there is a relapse rate. There are people, every week reaching out to me that have had multiple rounds of traditional ERP and have not recovered and are struggling still. And we need to find, different approaches and ways of adapting it to help. So that's that kind of intense, like wanting to avoid the intensity. Like there are ways into it with adapting the skills, emphasizing certain things first, taking it gradually. But then behavioral stuff, I mean, I think there is good old, reminders, writing down goals, getting a very clear plan, setting alarms, linking it to established behaviors, all that, Atomic Habits and, all those sort of books on behavior change. There's so many good ideas and that sort of stuff, but really it's, making a very strong plan and really trying to stick to it. And maybe that you need accountability and someone to help with that. And I like this one from, I think he's called BJ Fogg, who's a sort of behavior change guy, that he really emphasizes celebrating the win. So we try and struggle with behavior change a lot and like cope with the adverse feelings and try and make the change. We don't do enough of like patting ourselves on the back and really celebrating. If I practiced 2 minutes today, that's a win to celebrate. And, that reinforcing the positive change with kind of inner celebration in a way that feels right to the individual. I really like that approach. It becomes easier to change a behavior if it's rewarding. If I'm feeling good about myself for doing it and I see the benefit, then it's quite easy to change behaviors, or it's easier. I like the kind of setting intention, start of the day, reflection. Journaling can help this. If you have a journaling practice, it can help you commit to skills practice, because you can be writing about it and linking it together, and that can really help people. Obviously watching out for compulsive journalists like me in the past, but you can use that as a kind of way to remind you. And the big one for me is like, if you're really struggling to practice, set a timer for the time. And when that goes off, just start urge surfing the urge to not practice. And you are practicing, that alarm goes off and your mind goes, oh, I'll do it later. No, it's too scary. Whatever barriers, reason giving it gives, just start to acknowledge that, notice the feelings. Sometimes it's agitation, sometimes it's fatigue and lethargy, whatever that urge feels like, observe it in the body, remind yourself why you want to change, why it will work better to practice and do things, engage in a varied alternative, try to do the new behavior practice skills. But if you're doing that, you're practicing. And even if you can only just observe your mind a little bit for 2 minutes at that alarm, you're still practicing. So I find that is a really useful one. I've done that with some people who are very stuck with depression. And it's like, if you can just observe that depressive resistance enough, you start to get the gap there, and then you start to be able to practice, then you start being able to get up, and you start being able to do more things. It's hard, and you often need help doing that. But somehow we've got to find the way to practice. I mean, I think you'll agree the people who do best are putting in the hours and practicing the most. And, if you're struggling to do that, be very honest with your therapist and be completely honest. Most people struggle with practice. Just tell them how hard it is and you're not doing anything, or you're doing very little, and how can we work on this?
I don't know why I struggle with this. Can we talk about it and flesh it out? find out, and then you'll find out the blocks and resistances. And maybe it's like me when I was a kid. I hated homework, never did it, struggled at school probably because of that, but but I just didn't do it. I
Whereas
didn't
now
enjoy it.
you're very, very hardworking. So, you had a barrier, you had, no one made sense of it for you. They didn't tell you that actually you are smart. You just need to go longer and work more, and, and put these systems in place to help you. And you would have been able to do it as a kid. And slip and recommit, one of my favorite phrases. We might be on it for a while and then we fall off it, get back on it again. You put in a run of 30 days practice, brilliant. You then are off it for a week, just get back on it as soon as you can. Smallest achievable goal, make it just that small goal to start again and then build it up. Get a very specific plan. With some clients, like we've gone specific to the hour, the practice, all the variables, everything they're doing, like get it really mapped out very specifically for some people. And, for me, pain and suffering is often the big motivator. That was what got me to practice hard, was I was just so intensely suffering. And I was like, I don't want to follow where this is taking me. So I'm going to at least give it a shot. Like you said, actually, with Jack, give it at least 3 months or 6 months or whatever, really go for it and then see what it's like after that. And I did that. I was like, nothing to lose here. I'm feeling incredibly suicidal. Let's just go for it, because, I'm not going to go down that route. So, and then you start to see this change over that kind of time period.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. Commit to a time period. I said that to one of my clients today, funny enough. I literally gave the 3 month, well, let's just try it. Every week we commit to exposures, ACT, commit to the home practice, give it 3 months, and then, let's see.
Exactly.
Because they were worried. The block for them was there was no time frame, no timeline of like, I'm worried that if I put in this work, or what happens if it doesn't change, so I basically said, I'll give you a timeline, 3 months, you put in the work and there will be change. I can't guarantee how much, but your life will be better. And I always hesitate to say that as a therapist, but I've been working long enough with this person that, I laid it down as a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the kind of commitment you need people to make. And it's hard, very hard to do this, especially if people have been through therapy and it hasn't been so helpful, or they've had someone invalidate them, or, they've had the wrong type of treatment, or whatever it might be. It's harder to dust yourself off and give it another go. But it's never too late. And, there are lots of approaches. We're talking about ACT and ERP, but that's just one integration. You've got, various people doing ERP in varying different ways. You've got, interest-based therapy, metacognitive therapy, rumination focus. You've got all these different kind of ideas, like people integrating DBT into it. You can try different things and find the person who resonates, and, listen to the recovery stories and find the people you resonate with there, and then find out what they did, who did they work with, and what was helpful to them, and try to replicate it. And that's what I did, really was listening to people that had recovered through acceptance and values and attention and diffusion and things like this, and then really tried to replicate what they had done. And that's the simplest principle in anything in life, right? Is if you want to do something, find someone who's done it and then really study what they did and then try to do it.
Success leaves clues.
Exactly.
Someone once said that to me, and that always stuck with me. That always, if whatever I'm doing, find someone that is quote unquote successful in that thing and look at what they did to get there. And you might have to look at several people, because one of them could be an outlier, or, had it given to them, or depending on what it is. But, with enough data, you start to see the clues.
Yeah, exactly. Triangulate. And it's good to have a few perspectives. It's not healthy to just have like
No, of
one
course not.
perspective on things either, is it? Which is the great thing of your podcast is you have
Yeah.
these different experts and different perspectives, and you got to watch that doesn't
Stories.
different stories. You got to watch that doesn't feed into your mental compulsions. But
Yeah.
as long as you're not ruminating on, should I do it this way, that way, this approach, that approach, as long as you're not doing that and you're more seeing the overlap, the themes that overlap rather than getting all tangled up with it, then it's so helpful. I mean, I certainly learned a lot from, loads of people you've had on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Well, should we end there?
Yeah, feels a good place.
Yeah, lots of good information hopefully in there. Thank you to Jack, obviously, for coming on the podcast again and agreeing to have Jonny share his side of things. So thank you, Jack, as always. Appreciate you. And Jonny, appreciate you. Thank you for, taking the time to obviously prep for this. No doubt you did, and give a lot of good information, and not only put the message across as Jack did of let's put in the work, but, also acknowledging that sometimes there's barriers, but those barriers can be worked with.
Yeah.
So it's still a message of hope, it's yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I really appreciate obviously having this space and this time with you, Stu, but then also with Jack, courageously telling his story and talking about some of the aspects of OCD that are hard to talk about with taboo themes and other things. So he's been incredibly courageous and, is compassionately trying to help others. And it's awesome. And, I look forward to seeing more and more compassionate action and more people that he helps as he trains as a therapist and as he gets in the community more. So he's done an awesome job.
Yeah, he has. All right. Thanks, mate. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.